This weapon was forged by men facing execution for the slightest error. Engineers had to defy the laws of physics and common sense to wedge an artillery monster into a cramped turret, a beast capable of ripping that very turret off its ring when fired. The first test crews were effectively on a suicide mission. They knew the muzzle brake might not hold, sending shrapnel not at the enemy, but straight into the driver's eyes. Why did Soviet designers take such a desperate gamble? Why did the loader in this tank work in conditions bordering on a torture chamber, while German aces, who just yesterday considered themselves immortal, began abandoning perfectly intact King Tigers and fleeing the battlefield? Learn the story of the tank that turned enemy crews into ground meat even without penetrating their armor, and see how a single shot put an end to a war of technologies. July 1943, the Kursk salient. The air over the field near Prokhorovka does not smell of gunpowder. It smells of seared flesh, burnt diesel, and vaporized paint. The horizon is choked with thick, black smoke. It is not just machines burning. It is the illusion of technical parity burning down. In the sights of a T-34 gunner, there is a gray, blurry patch. The range is 1.5 kilometers. The German Tiger stands motionless, like a monument to its own invulnerability. The Soviet crew does what the manual prescribes. They close the distance. They know the mechanics of their own death, but orders are orders. 76 millimeters. In 41, this caliber was a death sentence for German tanks. Today, in the summer of 43, it is just a polite knock on a locked door. "Armor piercing," the commander rasps into his throat microphone. "Aim below the turret, at the ring." The gunner spins the hand wheel. Sweat floods his eyes, stinging his eyelids. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from wild tension. The tank jumps over potholes. There are no stabilizers. Fire. The clang of the breech is drowned out by the roar. The casing falls to the floor, ringing like an empty tin can. Ahead, where the German machine stands, a spark flares. Ricochet. The 6-kilogram shell bounces off the 100 millimeters of Krupp steel like gravel off a wall. The Tiger does not even flinch. Its turret slowly, with the whine of an electric drive, turns toward the Soviet tank. The Germans are in no hurry. They do not need to maneuver. They do not need to seek cover. They sit in a zone of absolute comfort, at a distance where Soviet guns are powerless, while their 88-millimeter gun works with surgical precision. This is not a battle. It is a turkey shoot. "Short halt!" screams the commander of the T-34. "Brake left, into the ravine!" The driver jerks the levers, trying to tear the machine away from the line of fire. The engine roars at maximum RPM. But you cannot cheat physics. The flight speed of the German shell is 1,000 meters per second. It arrives faster than the sound of the gunshot. Impact. It is not thunder. It is the sound of a spine snapping. The slug punches through the frontal armor of the T-34, turning the tank's guts into a shredder of white-hot shrapnel. The kinetic energy of the hit is such that it shears the transmission off its mounts. The fuel tanks, located in the fighting compartment, detonate instantly. The crew does not have time to scream. Inside the steel box, the temperature jumps to 1,000 degrees in a fraction of a second. Fat, skin, and uniforms fuse with the metal. A minute later, the hatch flips open. Something that was recently a loader falls out of the turret. He burns, rolling on the dry grass, trying to beat out the flames, but the oil that soaked his coveralls does not go out. This is agony. At the command post, officers watch the battle through binoculars. They are silent. Loss statistics cease to be numbers on paper. They turn into a graveyard of burning metal. Out of 10 Soviet tanks that went on the attack, not one returned. Out of 5 hit German machines, 3 have already been evacuated to the rear for repairs. In the evening, when the battle dies down, technical teams go out into the field. They walk among the smoking hulks, measuring the entry holes. The picture is depressing. An engineering colonel runs his finger along the trace of a German shell on the armor of a destroyed KV-1. The metal is turned inside out like plasticine. "Comrade Colonel," a young lieutenant approaches, wiping soot-blackened hands with a rag. "We examined the knocked-out Tiger, the one with the broken track." "Well?" The colonel does not take his eyes off the hole. "The entire frontal armor is pockmarked. We counted 12 hits. 12, Comrade Colonel. Not a single penetration. The shell's just flattened. The .76 caliber can't take it. Even from 500 meters it can't take it." The colonel spits on the scorched earth. He knows the truth. The Soviet tank doctrine, betting on maneuverability and mass production, has crashed against the new German armor. The Wehrmacht has changed tactics. Now they are hunters with long rifles, shooting game from a safe distance. "What do the crews say?" the colonel asks hollowly. "What can they say?" The lieutenant nervously crumples the rag. "The infantry is cursing. They say, 'We burn like straw.' The tankers are afraid to go out for direct fire. The Germans have Zeiss optics. They see us before we hear them. It's a meat grinder, Comrade Colonel. If we don't give them something heavier, they'll just run out. The people will run out." The situation is a dead end. Technical impotence. The most mass-produced tank of the war, the T-34-76, has turned into a target. To knock out a Tiger, our tankers need to perform a feat of heroism. Get within pistol range, flank it, and hit a vulnerable spot. And the German just needs to center his crosshairs and press the pedal. 1 to 10. That is the exchange rate of lives on this sector of the front. A coded message flies to the front headquarters. Dry, bureaucratic language, behind which stands the despair of thousands of men. The report contains no emotions, only facts. Means of combating the enemy's new heavy tanks are non-existent. Standard 76mm guns do not ensure the destruction of the frontal armor of tanks of the T6 Tiger and T5 Panther types at all combat ranges. We are suffering unjustifiably high losses. We demand immediate measures. We need a long reach. We need an argument capable of smashing through this wall. This paper lands on a desk in Moscow. It is not a request. It is an ultimatum. The front is not asking for a new tank. The front is demanding a means of survival. The time of easy victories and cavalry charges is over. The war has moved into a phase of heavy industrial struggle for attrition, where the victor is the one with more joules per square centimeter. A caliber is needed that will even the odds. No, not even. A caliber that will make German steel crack at the seams. Engineers in the rear understand. Half measures no longer work. Installing an 85mm gun is just a temporary solution, a band-aid on an open fracture. Something radically different is needed. Something that will turn the hunter into the victim. The answer must be given immediately. The deadline was yesterday. In Joseph Cotin's design bureau, the first sketches are already appearing on the drafting boards. But these are not just sketches. These are blueprints of retribution. The designer's eyes turn not to tank guns. They look at field artillery, at core guns capable of crushing concrete pillboxes. On the proving ground stands the heavy 122mm A-19 gun. Bulky, clumsy, powerful. It was created to stand on the ground and hammer the rear lines. No one in their right mind thought to shove this howitzer-like power into the cramped turret of a tank. It contradicts all laws of ergonomics and common sense. But common sense was left burning in the fields near Kursk. Now, only the physics of destruction dictates the terms. The silence of Design Bureau number 100 is deceptive. There is no roar of explosions here, but the tension is denser than on the front line. The air in the offices is so thick with smoke you could hang an axe in it. People sleep 4 hours a day, often right on the tables, resting their heads on rolls of drafting paper. September 1943. The front's ultimatum lies on Joseph Cotin's desk. The tankers are asking not just for a new machine, they are asking for a miracle. Engineers look at the blueprints and understand. The laws of physics cannot be repealed by an order from headquarters. The task sounds like madness. It is necessary to install an artillery system in a tank turret that was never intended for it. In the center of attention is the 122mm A-19 core gun. It is excellent field artillery. It stands on the ground, digging its spades into the soil, and sends 25 kilograms of death over 20 kilometers. It has a long barrel, monstrous recoil, and a huge breech. Turning it into a tank gun is engineering suicide. It won't fit, the lead designer says quietly, not taking the cigarette out of his mouth. He draws a line with a pencil across the turret sketch. Look at the dimensions of the breech. During recoil, it will simply crush the commander. Or it will blow out the rear wall of the turret.
This is a howitzer caliber, Joseph Yakovlevich.
It belongs in a field, not in a tank. Cotin is silent. He knows all the arguments against. First, weight. The barrel is so heavy that the center of gravity shifts critically forward. The tank will nosedive on every bump. Second, rate of fire. The A-19 has a screw breech. To open and close it takes time. Furthermore, separate loading ammunition. The projectile is separate. The casing with the charge is separate. In a cramped turret, in smoke and noise, the loader will have to juggle weights the size of kettlebells. This reduces the rate of fire to 2 or 3 rounds per minute. The German Panther has 6 to 8. Third, ammunition capacity. Shells of this caliber take up catastrophic amounts of space. The tank will hold barely 3 dozen rounds. We have no choice. Cotin's voice sounds dry, like the crack of breaking graphite. The 85mm gun is good, but it's a half measure. The 100mm is still raw. There are no shells for it in mass production. But the 122 caliber is in the warehouses. And most importantly, it has kinetic energy. The dispute moves into the plane of brutal mathematics. The engineers understand. Rate of fire is important in a duel of equals. But this will not be a duel of equals. The concept is changing. If we cannot shoot as often as the Germans, we must hit so hard that a second shot is not needed. 1 shell, 1 destroyed tank. This is the philosophy of an executioner, not a duelist. Fyodor Petrov's team undertakes the circumcision of the field gun. This is surgery on live metal. It is necessary to reduce the recoil length, otherwise the breech really will kill the crew. It is necessary to redesign the gun cradle. It is necessary to figure out how to balance this giant crowbar sticking out of the turret. We are cutting into the living flesh, the technologist grumbles, looking at the new mounting points. The trunnions will have to be moved. The balance is going to hell. We'll have to install powerful spring balancing mechanisms. This complicates the design. If a spring snaps in battle, the gunner simply won't be able to lift the barrel. Then make it so it doesn't snap, the chief designer cuts him off. And solve the issue with the breech. A screw breech for a tank is a death sentence. We need a sliding wedge semi-automatic. But there is no time to develop a new wedge breech. They have to make a compromise bordering on a crime. The first series will go with the old piston breech. This means the loader will curse the designers, manually unscrewing and screwing the breech after every shot, losing precious seconds. But that is the price that must be paid for power. Work goes on around the clock. Blueprints come down to the workshops, still wet with ink.
Lathe operators and millers turn parts for a gun that does not yet have a name, but already has the index D25T. The letter T stands for tank. This letter is a lie. The gun remains a beast forcibly driven into the cage of an armored hull. The main problem is the muzzle brake. When firing such a caliber, monstrous recoil energy is generated. If it is not dampened, the gun will tear itself out of the turret by the roots, rip off the turret ring, and throw the tank itself backward, breaking the transmission. A standard muzzle brake from a field gun won't do. It kicks up a huge cloud of dust, blinding the gunner and unmasking the position. "We need a new brake," the ballistician reports. His eyes are red from insomnia. "T-shaped, active type. It must absorb up to 40% of the recoil energy, otherwise the turret will jam after the very first shot." "Draw it," Khotin commands. But remember, if it bursts during tests, the shrapnel will fly into the driver's vision slits. There can be no mistakes. It was an all-in bet, an engineering risk for which, in wartime, one could face a tribunal as a saboteur. By installing a howitzer caliber in a breakthrough tank, the designers were violating all canons of tank building. They were creating a monster, with slow reloading, small ammo capacity, and a cramped turret. But this monster had one absolute advantage. It carried 270 kilowatts of energy at the muzzle in its breech. No one thought about crew comfort. Ergonomics were sacrificed for effectiveness. The loader in the IS-2 was about to work in conditions close to a torture chamber. To the left, a hot breech. To the right, the turret wall. Underfoot, casings. And in his hands, a shell weighing 25 kilograms, which must be carefully inserted into the rifling of the barrel. Then the casing rammed home, the breech closed, the contact checked. "This isn't a tank," someone from the acceptance commission said, looking at the wooden mock-up of the fighting compartment. "It's a self-propelled carriage. There's no room to turn around." "You don't need to turn around there," the design bureau representative answered. "You need to load and shoot there. The Germans have plenty of room in their Tigers, but that won't help them when 122 millimeters flies into their forehead." The final decision is made. The factory receives the order to prepare the tooling. Metallurgical furnaces begin to melt steel for the new barrels. The risk is colossal. If the gun does not show the stated characteristics, if the recoil destroys the chassis, if the rate of fire proves fatally low, it will not be just a failure. It will be a betrayal of the front, which is bleeding to death, waiting for help. But a grim confidence reigns in the design bureau offices. They know physics. They know that mass multiplied by velocity gives an argument against which there is no defense. All that remains is to make this argument work without killing its own crew in the process. The race with metal begins. A battle not for millimeters of armor, but for joules of energy. Gorokhovetsky Proving Ground, October 1943. The mud here is mixed with fuel oil and metal shavings. The wind cuts to the bone, but the men near the concrete bunker are hot. On the pad stands Object 240, the prototype of the future IS-2. It looks disproportionate. The barrel is too long. The muzzle brake is massive, crude, like a piece of cast iron welded on in a hurry. This machine is a challenge to common sense. The designers are trying to cheat Newton's third law. The task is simple and deadly dangerous. Keep the energy of the shot inside a 46-ton machine. When the powder charge detonates, it pushes the shell forward and the gun backward. The recoil impulse of the 122mm A-19 gun is equal to 20 tons of force. It is as if a speeding truck slammed into a wall at full speed. If this energy is not dampened, the gun breech will fly into the rear wall of the turret during recoil. If the recoil mechanisms fail, the barrel will be torn from the trunnions,
and it will turn the crew into ground meat. If the turret ring turns out to be too weak, the turret will simply be torn off the hull. Chief designer Fyodor Petrov stands next to the machine. He hasn't slept for 3 days. His eyes are sunken. His hands in his greatcoat pockets are clenched into fists. "Checked the brake?" His voice sounds hoarse, almost a whisper. "Yes, sir, Fyodor Fyodorovich," the lead engineer answers. "New one, T-shaped."
Calculated efficiency is 60%. It should hold. Should doesn't fit here. If it cracks, shrapnel will shred the viewing devices. The driver will go blind. They are talking about the muzzle brake. This is the key component. It is this metal attachment at the end of the barrel that must take the impact of the white-hot gases and divert them to the sides, creating forward thrust that compensates for the recoil. The first version of the brake burst during tests like a paper bag. Now the second version is installed. The German type, two-chambered, turned out to be too complex. They had to invent their own. The test crew takes their places. These are not frontline tankers. These are factory suicide squad members. Men whose job is to test machinery to the breaking point. The driver slams the heavy hatch shut. Inside the tank, it is dark and smells of damp iron. The tightness is incredible. The breech of the D-25T gun takes up almost the entire space of the fighting compartment. The loader picks up a shell, 25 kilograms of cold steel. He drives it into the barrel. The sound of metal on metal is dull, heavy. Following it goes the casing with the charge. "Ready!" he shouts, jumping back to the wall so as not to get hit by the breech during recoil. "Fire!" commands the proving ground commander over the radio. The gunner presses the trigger. Time fractures. From the outside, it looks like a lightning flash. A sheaf of fire 5 meters long erupts from the barrel. But the most important thing happens not in front, but to the sides. The muzzle brake works. Jets of white-hot gas strike sideways with such force that they tear the sod off the ground in a radius of 10 meters. The shockwave hits the observer's ears even in the bunker. The tank squats. 46 tons of steel shudder. The road wheels press into the tracks. The torsion bars groan from the overload. The machine rolls backward, as if hit in the forehead with a sledgehammer. Inside the turret at that moment, hell breaks loose. The breech flies backward with monstrous speed, stopping just a few centimeters from the guardrail. The hydraulics of the recoil mechanism hiss, absorbing megajoules of energy. The air instantly fills with acrid powder smoke. The fan on the turret roof begins to howl, trying to draw out the fumes, but it cannot keep up. Silence. Only a ringing in the ears and the light crackling of cooling metal. The commander's hatch opens. Blue smoke pours out of the turret. "Alive?" Petrov shouts, running to the tank. He forgets about rank, about the generals in the bunker. He only cares about the life of the machine and the men. The tester's head appears from the hatch. His face is black with soot. He takes off his headset and shakes his head, trying to regain his hearing. "Alive, Fyodor Fyodorovich." The tester spits black saliva. "Only our teeth clattered so hard I almost bit my tongue off, but otherwise normal." Engineers rush to inspect the gun. They are looking for cracks. They are looking for deformation. "Ring is intact," the technician reports, shining a flashlight into the gap between the turret and the hull. "No play. Rotation is normal." "The brake?" "In place. Even the paint didn't burn off, just got sooted." The muzzle brake held. It redirected the energy of the explosion, forcing it to work for the design, not against it. The taming of physics has taken place. Howitzer power, capable of destroying buildings, was now locked in the volume of a tank turret and obeyed the will of man. "Load the second," Petrov commands.
Now there is no tremor in his voice, only hard metal. Tempo! Work on casing extraction. Second shot. Third. 10th. The proving ground turns into a forge of thunder. The tank is shrouded in smoke. Inside, the crew works as a single mechanism, although every movement comes with difficulty. Separate loading is hard labor. Shell, casing, ramming, fire, extraction, ventilation, and again, shell, casing. After a series of 20 shots, the crew tumbles out onto the grass. Their hands are shaking. Breathing is heavy. Their lungs are clogged with powder gases. Blood is running from the gunner's nose, the result of barotrauma from pressure changes. Ventilation needs strengthening, he rasps, wiping his face with his sleeve. We'll suffocate to hell after the 5th shell. Eyes sting. Can't see the sight. We'll strengthen it, the designer nods. He makes a note in his notebook. Install additional exhaust fan in the turret rear. But these are trifles. The main thing is that the gun didn't shake the tank apart. The integration of the artillery monster into the tracked chassis was successful. Now it is not just Object 240. It is a predator that has grown teeth. A general from the main Automotive Armored Directorate Commission approaches the tank. He runs his hand along the still hot barrel. The metal vibrates as if alive. Well, designers, the general says, not looking at the people. You beat physics. Recoil is normal. But iron doesn't shoot. Men shoot. And they fight against fear. He turns to Petrov. Tomorrow, state trials. We will shoot at a real target. Let's see what your argument does to German armor. Physics is good, but I need a result. I need a hole in a tiger. The proving ground sinks into twilight. The cooling tank clicks with metal. Tomorrow it will not just shoot into the void. Tomorrow it must prove its right to exist by killing its own kind. Kubinka, Scientific Research Institute of Armored Vehicles Proving Ground, December 1943. The frost is such that the grease on the breeches thickens, turning into glue. On the observation deck is a group of high-ranking officers. Greatcoats with astrakhan collars, papakas, binoculars. Among them is Marshal Kliment Voroshilov. The atmosphere is heavy, distrustful. The generals remember the summer. They remember the reports of how the 85 caliber ricocheted off the frontal armor of the new German Cats. They do not need the designer's promises. They need to see the death of a German machine with their own eyes. Skepticism hangs in the air, dense as the frosty fog. At a distance of 1,500 meters stands the target. It is not a plywood shield. It is a trophy Panther captured near Leningrad. German engineers were proud of this machine. Sloped frontal armor, high steel hardness, flawless weld seams. This is the pinnacle of Teutonic tank building, a symbol of technological superiority that has humiliated Soviet crews for the last 6 months. On the firing line, the IS-2 growls with its diesel engine. Compared to the elegant silhouette of the German tank, it seems rude, as if hewn with an axe from a solid piece of cast iron. The muzzle brake smokes in the frost. In the breech are 122 millimeters of arguments. Fire! The command sounds dry, without pathos. Flash! The roar of the shot momentarily deafens everyone present, making even experienced artillerymen flinch. The heavy, blunt-nosed, armor-piercing shell BR-471, weighing 25 kilograms, leaves the barrel bore at a speed of 800 meters per second. The flight lasts less than 2 seconds, but for the observers, this time stretches into eternity. Impact. It is not ringing metal on metal. It is the sound of a catastrophe. A dull, visceral crack that vibrates the ground underfoot. Observers through binoculars see the 45-ton carcass of the German tank shudder, as if kicked by a giant. Dust and snow grit settle. The generals lower their binoculars and exchange glances.
Silence. No one says anything. Everyone walks toward the target. The snow crunches under boots, and this crunch is the only sound on the proving ground. When the commission approaches the Panther, the conversations die out completely. What they see does not fit into the usual picture of armor-piercing action. The shell hit the glacis plate. It did not pierce it in the classical sense. There is no neat little hole here. The kinetic energy of the impact was so monstrous that the armor failed as a structure. A jagged breach the size of a child's head gapes in the metal. Around it is a web of deep cracks, radiating like a spider web across the entire hull. But the scariest part is not that. The marshal walks closer and touches the side of the tank. "Look at the turret," he says quietly. The Panther's turret is shifted. The impact of the shell on the hull transmitted such an impulse that it sheared the ring bolts. The multi-ton turret was ripped from its mountings and shifted half a meter to the side. The weld seams on the hull burst like rotten stitching. The armor plates came apart at the joints. "If there had been a crew inside," one of the engineers begins, but falls silent. No need to finish. Everyone understands. If people had been sitting inside, they would not have been killed by shrapnel. They would have been killed by the pressure change and the monstrous overload. A blow of such force breaks neck vertebrae, tears internal organs from their ligaments, turns a human into a sack of bones. It is not a wound. It is instantaneous death from a concussion of the entire organism. "Range?" Voroshilov asks, not turning around. 1,500 meters, Comrade Marshal." "And at 2,000? "Calculations show preservation of destructive energy. Even if it doesn't penetrate, it will disable the crew and transmission with the impact." It was a moment of truth. The Panther, that impregnable fortress, turned out to be a fragile toy in the face of the brute, overwhelming force of the Soviet caliber. German steel was hard, but brittle. The Soviet shell was blunt, heavy, and ruthless. It worked not like an awl, but like a sledgehammer. "This is not a tank," says someone from the generals of the main automotive armored directorate, looking at the hole in the armor. "This is a beast slayer." The dialogue is dry, concrete. No excitement, just a statement of fact. "Do we launch into series production?" Khotin asks. "Immediately, and have the regiments staffed by spring. The Germans think they have armor. They are mistaken. They only have targets." The inspection continues. Engineers measure the depth of penetration, photograph the destruction. But the main conclusion has already been drawn. The equation of death has been solved. The IS-2 is accepted. On this day, at the proving ground in Kubinka, the era of German impunity ended. There will be no more duels where T-34s circle around a tiger, trying to bite its heel. Now the conversation will be short. One shot, one corpse. Irony of fate, the gun that was barely squeezed into the turret, the gun that was scolded for its low rate of fire and separate loading, turned out to be the only key to victory. Because when 25 kilograms of steel is flying at you, you don't care how fast the enemy reloads. You are already dead. The marshal casts a last glance at the mangled Panther and walks to his car. "Good work, comrade designers. Pity the Germans haven't seen this yet." "They will," Petrov answers. "They will see it soon." The proving ground empties. The lonely, mutilated German machine remains standing in the snow as a monument to justice served. Its turret is torn off, its chest smashed, and its spine broken. This is exactly what the Panzerwaffe will look like in a year. The sentence has been signed by caliber 122 mm, and it is not subject to appeal. February 1944. The area of the village of Lysianka. This is no longer a proving ground with clean snow. This is Ukrainian Chernozem turned into fat, sticky mud that sucks boots in up to the knee and rips tracks off wheels. The Korsun-Shevchenkovsky pocket. It is cold, damp, and smells of rot here. In ambush stands the crew of Guards Lieutenant Grachev. The machine is hidden in a copse. The engine is off so as not to unmask the position with blue exhaust. The silence is such that you can hear the manifold cooling. This is the first real battle for the IS-2. The theory check is over. Bloody practice has begun. A German column crawls along the road. They move arrogantly. In front are Panthers, behind them armored personnel carriers and trucks. The Germans are confident. They are used to Russian tanks being easy prey at ranges over a kilometer. They do not know that the rules of the game change tonight. "Range 1200, the gunner's voice in the headset is calm but tense. "I see the lead in the crosshairs." "High explosive fragmentation," commands Grachev. "On the lead." Why high explosive? Because a 25-kilogram shell with 3 kilograms of explosives inside does not have to penetrate armor to stop a machine. It just needs to hit. The loader at this moment is the busiest man in the crew. He has no right to make a mistake. He grabs the shell. 25 kilograms of cold metal. The slug, slippery with grease, tries to slip out of his hands. He drives it into the breech using a rammer. A dull thud. Following it goes the casing with the propellant charge. Another push. The breech clangs shut. "Ready!" Fire. The tank jerks backward, pressing its stern into the liquid mud. Ahead, where the lead Panther was crawling, an orange ball flares up. The explosion is of such force that the turret of the German tank is ripped from the ring and thrown onto the roadside like a lid from a pot. Road wheels fly apart. The hull of the machine instantly settles, turning into a pile of burning scrap metal. The crew didn't even have time to understand what killed them. They were simply erased by a 122mm eraser. "Armor piercing! On the rear vehicle!" Grachev yells. The column has stopped. The Germans are in a panic. They do not see the enemy, but they see the result of his work. Screams, roaring engines, attempts to turn around in the narrow corridor of the road. But the mud does not forgive mistakes. The heavy German cats spin their wheels, digging into the black earth. They are trapped. Inside the IS-2, hellish athletics begin. The loader works like a robot whose fear fuses have blown. Jerk, shell in the barrel. Jerk, casing in the barrel. A strike with his hand on the breech wedge. "Ready!" Seconds drag on. The smoke from the shot doesn't have time to clear. The fan hums at the limit, but eyes still water from the powder fumes. Second shot. The armor-piercing shell BR-471B finds its target. It hits the Panther in the forehead as it tried to turn its gun. The kinetic impact is monstrous. The shell smashes through the upper glacis plate, passes through the entire fighting compartment, knocks out the engine, and flies out the rear. The tank shudders and freezes. No one jumps out of the hatches. The shock wave inside the closed volume turned the crew's insides into jelly. This is not a battle. This is a beating. 9 minutes. That is exactly how long this episode lasts. In 9 minutes, Grachev's crew fires 6 shots. 6 shots, 5 destroyed tanks and self-propelled guns. The Germans open return fire.
Shells of 75 and 88 millimeters hammer the frontal armor of the IS-2.
The ringing is such that it feels like sitting inside a bell being hit with a sledgehammer.
"Commander, ricochet!" the driver reports. "Another ricochet!"
The armor holds. The sloped upper glacis, the thick sheets of the cast turret, it all works. German shells leave only deep furrows and pockmarks, but do not pass inside. The crew feels the blows, but the machine remains alive. The feeling of vulnerability that has haunted tankers since '41 disappears. In its place comes a cold, angry confidence. We are tougher. The loader falls onto the ammo crate. His hands are shaking so much he can't unbutton the collar of his tunic. Sweat pours down, mixing with the soot on his face. In these 9 minutes, he has tossed 1.5 hundredweight of iron. In cramped quarters, in smoke, under fire. This is an extreme physical load. But he smiles, wickedly, baring white teeth on a black face.
"Well, Fritzes," he rasps. "Don't like the caliber?"
A bit heavy? Grachev looks through the periscope. Equipment is burning on the road. Black smoke rises to the grey sky. The stench of burning rubber and meat penetrates even through the armor. The German infantry has scattered into the woods. Tigers and panthers, those kings of the battlefield, are now just piles of rusting metal. The myth of the Panzerwaffe's invulnerability lies in the mud near Ogliadov, torn to shreds. This battle showed the main thing. The IS-2 is not just a breakthrough tank, it is an instrument of dominance. Yes, it is slow. Yes, the rate of fire is 2 shots per minute against the Germans' 6. But that doesn't matter, because the first hit is enough. The German can hit 3 times and not penetrate. The IS hits once and puts a period at the end of the sentence. Staff officers who arrived later at the battle site walked among the burnt German machines in silence. They saw torn-off turrets. They saw split hulls. An engineer colonel examining a Ferdinand whose superstructure had been shifted 0.5 meter said only one phrase: "There is no defense against a crowbar." News of the new Russian tank spread through the German trenches faster than orders from headquarters. Radio intercepts are full of panic. "Attention! Heavy tanks in the sector. Caliber 122. Armor doesn't hold. Do not engage in frontal attacks." The hunters turned into game. Fear reversed polarity. Now, hearing the heavy, low rumble of the V2 diesel, German crews prayed that the Russian gunner would miss, because they wouldn't get a second chance. Spring 1944. The front rolls west, leaving behind plowed earth and burning hulks of equipment. But the main changes are happening not on the general staff maps, but in minds. A new sound inhabits the Wehrmacht radio waves. It is not static. It is the vibration of fear. Previously, German tankers were the elite. Tigers and panthers allowed them to feel like masters of life and death. They drove onto the battlefield as if on safari, knowing that Russian shells bounced off their Krupp armor, while their optics allowed them to kill with impunity. Now the safari is over. A bigger beast has appeared in the forest. A rumor spreads through German units. Soldiers pass it in a whisper, like a contagious disease. The Russians have bred a monster. They call it different names, but the meaning is always the same. This is a death against which there is no protection. A secret circular reaches the headquarters of SS tank divisions. The document is dry, printed on bad paper, but its content is an official admission of technical defeat. Inspector General of Armored Troops Heinz Guderian is forced to sign the death sentence of his own doctrine. The text of the instruction is categorical. It is forbidden to engage in open frontal duels with heavy tanks of the IS type. Conduct combat only from ambushes, from short ranges, and only to the flanks and rear. This is no longer the tactic of victors. This is the tactic of survival. The pride of the Panzerwaffe, the heavy tank battalions, switch to a partisan footing. They no longer seek an encounter, they avoid it. On the front line, it looks like this. A German observer sees a characteristic silhouette through a stereo telescope. Low hull, flattened turret, long barrel with a massive muzzle brake on the end. "Joseph Stalin!" The observer's scream breaks into a falsetto. 12 o'clock! Chaos begins on the German company radio. "Back! Everyone back! Don't shoot!" The commander of a Tiger, who just yesterday considered himself invulnerable, gives the order to the driver to reverse into cover. He knows the math. His 88mm gun will not penetrate the front of an IS from a distance of 1.5 kilometers, but the Russian answer will arrive guaranteed. And even if it doesn't penetrate the armor, the blow of 25 kilograms of explosives will rip off the turret, concuss the crew, and disable the sights. The risk is unacceptable. The psychology of IS-2 crews transforms symmetrically. If at Kursk, tankers went into battle with the doom of suicide bombers, now they go with the cold calm of executioners. They know they are sitting behind 12 centimeters of cast steel. They know their nose section can withstand a direct hit from a German shell. Inside the IS turret, after another blow of a German slug against the armor, there is a ringing. The crew is shaken. Scale falls off. "Hit us, the bastard!" The commander grins angrily, looking into the vision block. "Driver, alive?" "Alive," the driver responds. "Just ears popping." "Well, now we'll answer him." This sense of impunity changes the style of war. Soviet tankers stop fussing. They don't need to look for bypass routes, don't need to hide in ravines. They come out onto the crest of a height and simply aim the gun. This gesture, the turning of the turret toward the enemy, now causes panic terror among the Germans. Because the muzzle of the D-25T gun looks like a black tunnel to the underworld. German prisoners at interrogations tell the same story. "We stopped believing in armor," says a tank lieutenant, nervously smoking trophy tobacco. "When you see an IS-2, you understand. Distance doesn't save you. Armor slope doesn't save you. Nothing saves you. We pray for only one thing, that your gunner misses, or that his breech jams." Fear of the 122mm caliber becomes irrational. The sound of an IS-2 shot is impossible to confuse with anything else. It is a dull, rolling boom that vibrates the chest even at a distance of a kilometer. The shell flies with a characteristic howl, resembling the noise of an approaching subway train. The Germans call this sound Stalin's breath. In one of the battles on the Sandomierz bridgehead, a group of King Tigers, the newest, super-heavy German monsters, ran into an ambush of IS tanks. The Germans were confident in their new, thick armor, but the very first shot from a Soviet tank took the turret off the lead machine. The remaining German crews simply abandoned perfectly functioning tanks and ran. Their nerves gave out. The iron would have withstood a couple more hits, but the human will broke instantly. The sight of the destroyed flagship paralyzed the will to resist. It was a capitulation of spirit. The German war machine, built on discipline and faith in technical superiority, began to crumble. Wehrmacht tankers realized they were no longer hunters. They were game. And they were being hunted with large calibers. Now, every shot from an IS-2 was not just an act of destroying equipment. It was a psychological attack. The explosion of a 122mm HE shell next to a trench drove the infantry insane. The shockwave broke bones without even touching them with shrapnel. The earth shook so hard that people lost their orientation in space. The war turned into the execution of a sentence. The Soviet crew acted as the judge,
and the long barrel of the gun as the pointing finger. Target sighted. Short halt. Fire! And silence. Because where the shell fell, there is no one left to be afraid. Germans began writing in letters home, "Here in the east, the gates of hell have opened. Russian tanks don't burn anymore. They come and break us like matchsticks. We have no defense against this hammer." The balance of power didn't just tip. It collapsed, crushing the myth of the invincibility of German weapons. The IS-2 became the material embodiment of the inevitability of retribution. Heavy, rude, smelling of diesel and gunpowder, it dictated its terms on the battlefield, and the condition was one: surrender or die. Europe, winter 1945. The operational expanse of the Russian steppes was left behind. The war changed scenery. Now it is not a duel on horizons where you can see for kilometers. Now it is a rat race in stone labyrinths. Poland, East Prussia, the suburbs of Berlin. Old cities with narrow streets, thick brick walls, and deep cellars turned into multi-layered fortresses. Here, in the tightness of urban sprawl, tigers and panthers lost their advantage in optics. Distances shrank to 100, 50, sometimes 20 meters. But it was cramped for Soviet tanks here too. The long barrel of the IS-2 made it hard to turn around in alleyways. It clipped building corners, lampposts, shop windows. It seemed that a heavy tank did not belong here, that it was a bull in a china shop. But tactics dictated new conditions. The IS-2 ceased to be a pure tank destroyer. It returned to the roots of its artillery nature. It became an assault gun, a concrete hammer. The storming of Poznan, February 45. The citadel fortress is meters of concrete and steel dug into the earth. German infantry sits in pillboxes, in the cellars of stone mansions turned into strong points, machine gun nests in every window, Panzerfausts behind every corner. Soviet infantry lies flat under a leaden rain, impossible to raise a head. Any attack drowns in blood 10 seconds after it starts. "Give us the box," the commander of the infantry assault group rasps into the radio. "Machine gun in the basement, Sector 7. Can't lift our heads." From around the corner, crushing curbstones with its tracks and crumbling the brickwork of fences, crawls an IS-2. It moves slowly, using ruins for cover. Infantry presses against its sides, picking off Faustniks on the upper floors. The tank is a magnet for fire, but it is also the only chance to get further. The turret turns. The barrel looks point blank at the basement embrasure of a residential building, from where a German MG-42 machine gun is firing. Inside the tank, the crew works according to a different scheme. Armor-piercing shells are stowed in the far rack. Now the main caliber is the high-explosive fragmentation grenade OF-471. 25 kilograms of weight, 3.5 kilograms of cast TNT and ammonal inside a thick-walled steel casing. This is not a shell for piercing armor. This is a shell for demolishing real estate. "High explosive! Fuse set to delay!" commands the lieutenant. The loader rams the heavy hunk of metal. The fuse cap is screwed off. This means the shell won't explode upon touching the wall. It will punch through the brickwork, fly inside the room, and only there, with a delay of a fraction of a second, will the detonator trigger. A shot in the city sounds different than in a field. The sound wave doesn't go off into space. It beats against the walls of houses, reflects multiple times, creating an acoustic blow of such force that window frames fly out, along with the glass in neighboring buildings. Dust knocks centuries-old tiles off roofs. The shell enters the house wall at the first floor level. Brick is no obstacle for it. It stitches through masonry half a meter thick,
like cardboard. The explosion happens inside. It is not just a pop. It is a volumetric detonation in a confined space. Tongues of flame and black clouds of smoke burst from windows, doors, and cracks in the building. The walls bulge outward. Floors between stories jump and collapse downward, burying the garrison. The house seems to settle, exhaling life along with concrete dust. The machine gun goes silent, forever. "Clear!" the infantry yells, rising to attack. "Crush 'em!" The IS-2 crawls over the pile of broken brick that a minute ago was the building's facade. It goes further, to the next strong point. This was the work of an amputation surgeon. If a sniper was sitting in a building, the tank didn't target the sniper. The tank destroyed the floor he was sitting on, or the whole building entirely. The principle of overkill. Better to spend one expensive shell and level the building than to lose a platoon of soldiers storming a stairwell. In street fighting, the terrible effectiveness of the caliber became apparent. 122 millimeters left no wounded in the kill zone. The shockwave in rooms killed by pressure. Germans found in such ruins often had no visible injuries. They just sat dead, with blood coming from their ears and nose. Internal organs were ruptured by air vibration. German fortifications, calculated for field artillery of 75 millimeter caliber, crumbled like sandcastles. In Warsaw and Poznan, IS-2s cracked defenses methodically, block by block.
See the pillbox at the intersection?
I see the concrete dome. Remove it. One shot with an armor-piercing shell at a concrete pillbox acted like a sledgehammer on a walnut. Kinetic energy of 270 kilowatts cracked concrete, tore off armored domes, caused concussions to the garrison even without penetration. But more often they fired high-explosive shells. 2 or 3 hits, and the pillbox turned into a crater filled with rebar and gravel. The logistics of war in the city were monstrous. The tank's ammo capacity was only 28 rounds. This is negligibly small for intense combat. Tanks constantly retreated to reload. "Empty," reported the commander. "Pulling back." The tank backed around a corner. Shell carriers ran up to it. Right on the street, under the whistle of stray bullets, the crew loaded heavy slugs through the hatches, 25 kilograms each. Pass from the ground to the armor, from the armor into the turret, stow in the rack. This is back-breaking labor. Men rubbed their hands raw, threw out their backs, but the pace didn't drop. The Germans tried to snap back. Panzerfausts were the main threat. A shot from an alleyway into the side or rear, where armor is thinner, could burn the machine. Therefore, the IS-2 never went alone. Infantry always swarmed around it. Submachine gunners sat on the armor, controlling the upper floors. It was a symbiosis of steel and flesh. The tank provided power, the men provided eyes. "Right, 3rd floor, balcony, Faustnik!" The turret doesn't have time to turn, but the troops on the armor unleash a long burst from PPSH submachine guns. The German falls from the balcony onto the pavement. The tank turns its gun and, for good measure, sends a high-explosive shell into the same window. The apartment is turned inside out. By the spring of '45, the IS-2 earned a reputation as an inevitable force. In Europe, it was called the Russian battering ram. It punched through city walls, paving the road to the heart of the Reich. On the armor of tanks, inscriptions in white paint appeared. "To Berlin," "For Stalingrad," "Avenger." The machines were covered in a layer of brick dust, scratched by rebar, with dents from shrapnel. Muzzle brakes were black with soot. They didn't look like parade beauties, but like tired, angry workers of war. This was no longer just a tank. It was a siege engine of a new era. Medieval battering rams broke gates with wooden logs. The IS-2 broke cities with the energy of gunpowder. "Blockage ahead," reports the driver. "They put a streetcar across the road, sandbags." "Go through it," the commander answers calmly. That's not an obstacle. 46 tons of mass pick up speed. Impact. Screeching metal. The barricade flies apart. The streetcar crumples and flies against the house wall. The path is clear. Somewhere ahead, behind the smoke of fires and the dust of collapsed walls, the outlines of Berlin could already be guessed. The IS-2 was going there not to fight. It was going to end the war. And for this, it had the weightiest argument in all of Europe. Caliber 122 millimeters. April 1945, Königsberg. The fortress city, clad in granite and red brick, is drowning in a milky white fog. This is the famous Prussian dampness mixed with the soot of thousands of fires. Visibility is 100 meters. Beyond that, the world dissolves into a gray haze. For a tanker, fog is a blindfold. You are blind. You hear the sounds of battle, hear the clanking of tracks somewhere in the neighboring block, but you don't know who it is, friend or foe. Every intersection is Russian roulette. Around any corner, behind any pile of rubble, a German self-propelled gun might be standing. An IS-2 crew slowly advances along a narrow street. Tracks screech on the wet cobblestones. The engine runs at low RPM, almost a whisper, but in the stone well of the street, this sound seems like the roar of a rockfall. The commander, sticking out of the hatch just enough to see over the periscopes, peers into the murk. "Stop," he says quietly into the throat mic. "Movement in the ruins on the right." The tank freezes. The gun barrel, long, with the massive knob of the muzzle brake, slowly, millimeter by millimeter, crawls to the right. The electric drive hums barely audibly. Gunner Nikitin is glued to the sight eyepiece. The world for him has narrowed to a circle with crosshairs and a range scale. In the gray jelly of the fog, an angular silhouette emerges. It is not a wall. Walls don't have sloped armor plates. It's a Jagdpanther, a German tank destroyer. Low, predatory, with a long 88 gun looking straight at them. Seconds begin to flow like thick grease. Stalemate situation. A duel at pistol range. 300 meters. At such a distance, armor doesn't matter. Penetration is guaranteed from both sides. The survivor will be the one who shoots first. And who hits. Nikitin knows the price of a miss. His life now depends on mathematics and motor skills. He has an armor-piercing shell BR-471B in the barrel. 25 kilograms of death. The German has a unitary cartridge. The German loader, if he misses, will throw in a new shell in 6 seconds. Nikitin has separate loading. If he misses, or the shell ricochets, he will need 25, maybe 30 seconds to reload. Half a minute. In battle, that is an eternity. In that time, the German will have time to shoot 4 times. He will turn the IS-2 into a colander. There is no right to make a mistake. There is no right to a second shot. There is only one chance. Hands on the aiming wheels are moist with sweat. His heart beats against his ribs so hard, it seems the vibration is transmitting to the tank hull. But he needs to breathe evenly. Inhale, exhale, hold. The crosshairs settle on the joint of the superstructure and the hull of the German machine. The most vulnerable spot. "Fire!" screams the commander, noticing the German barrel twitch, starting to aim. Nikitin squeezes the trigger.
In the enclosed space of the street, the shot of the 122mm gun is like the end of the world. The shockwave knocks plaster off building facades on both sides of the street. The tank is thrown backward. Inside the turret, everything is clouded with smoke, despite the working fan. But Nikitin doesn't wait for the smoke to clear. He doesn't know if he hit or not. "Load!" he yells in an inhuman voice, tearing his vocal cords. The loader has already bolted from his seat. There is no grace in his actions, only animal terror and practiced automatism. A jerk to the ammo rack. A shell the weight of a pood weight. Heavy breathing, a wheeze. Shell into the tray.
Slam with the rammer. Ring of metal. 1, 2, 3, counts the commander to himself. Seconds drag painfully slow. It seems time has stopped. Where is the return shot? If the German is alive, he should have fired by now. "Casing!" rasps the loader. He grabs the brass casing with the powder charge. It is lighter than the shell, but in the cramped space, tripping over the spent casing on the floor, every movement is a battle. Ramming. The breech clangs shut. The wedge is in place. "Ready!" The loader's scream drowns in the rushing of blood in the ears. 22 seconds have passed. 22 seconds of waiting for death. The commander looks into the periscope. Smoke and dust slowly settle, pinned down by the damp air. The German self-propelled gun stands in the same place. But it has changed. Its frontal plate is split. The shell didn't just penetrate the armor. The kinetic energy of the impact was such that the weld seams burst, and the Jagdpanther's superstructure opened up like a rotten nut. Thick, black, oily smoke pours out of the jagged hole. Fire inside the German machine flares up instantly. Ammunition detonation. A sheaf of flame erupts from the hatches to the height of the second floor.
"Done," exhales the commander. "Stand down, Nikitin. Don't fuss."
Silence falls in the IS-2 turret. Only the heavy, wheezing breathing of men is heard. The loader slides down the turret wall to the floor, wiping his face with a dirty rag. His hands shake with coarse tremors. This is the come-down. The adrenaline that allowed him to move heavy weights with the speed of a machine is leaving weakness behind. Nikitin takes his face away from the sight. He has a red mark on his forehead from the headrest. He looks at his hands. They are trembling. He just won life from death. The stake was half a minute of time.
"Went in well," he says quietly, as if to himself. "Like into butter." In this battle, there was no strategy of generals. There was no wisdom of designers. There was only one moment when everything was decided by the composure of one man. A man who knew that his gun was the most powerful in the world, but the slowest in the world. And this responsibility pressed on his shoulders heavier than armor. The Königsberg fog closes its embrace over the street again. The tank moves off, bypassing the burning hulk of the enemy. The metal of the German machine crackles in the fire, melting and dripping onto the pavement. It was a sniper duel performed by heavy artillery. One shot, one death. No second chances. War here, in the stone bag of the city, became extremely personal. You see the one you kill, and you know he sees you. But in the equation of survival, the variable of caliber 122mm turned out to be decisive. German speed lost to Soviet power. Again. On the side of the turret, the word "faithful" is written in chalk. The crew knows, as long as they don't miss, the tank remains faithful to them. But every time, driving a shell into the breach, they remember those 20 seconds of silence when you are unarmed in the face of the enemy. and this fear is the price for the right to be the strongest on the battlefield. May 1945. Berlin lies in ruins. Smoke rises over the Reichstag, mixed with the spring air of victory. The crews of heavy IS-2 tanks, sooty, deafened, deadly tired, open their hatches. They look at the work of their hands, at the defeated capital of the 1,000-year Reich, turned into a pile of broken brick. They are victors. They are judges. But thousands of kilometers away, in the Urals, in the offices of the Design Bureau of Plant No. 9, a different atmosphere reigns. There are no fireworks here. There is no intoxicating sense of freedom.
There is silence here, broken only by the scratch of pencils on drafting paper and the hum of ventilation. Chief designer Fyodor Fyodorovich Petrov stands by the window. He looks at the grey factory yard, where another batch of guns is being loaded onto platforms. He knows that his D-25T gun has just put a period at the end of the most terrible war of humanity. He knows that his offspring, the 122mm argument, broke the back of the Nazi war machine. But he feels no triumph. He feels only a monstrous, leaden fatigue, and a cold that has nothing to do with the weather. This is the cold that lives in the spine of every Soviet chief designer, the cold of fear. Victory at the front was forged by people who walked on a razor's edge in the rear. The history of the creation of the IS-2 is not only a history of engineering genius, it is a history of survival under the gun of the system. In 1943, when the question of creating a new gun was being decided, the stake was more than life. It was a bet on fate. Petrov remembers that day at the proving ground when the first muzzle brake burst. Then, a year and a half ago, that rupture of metal could have become the rupture of his life. In the commission sat men in shoulder boards with cornflower blue piping. For them, a technical failure is not a reason for reworking. It is grounds for Article 58. Wrecking. Sabotage. Disruption of defense order. Fyodor Fyodorovich, the curator from the organ's voice, was quiet, insinuating, but all the more terrifying for it. Do you understand that the front is burning? Do you understand that every day of delay is hundreds of our tankers burned to death? If your gun doesn't work in a week, we will consider that you are working for the Germans. It wasn't blackmail. It was a statement of fact. Many of Petrov's colleagues, brilliant engineers, were no longer sitting in offices. They worked in sharashkas, prison design bureaus behind barbed wire. They created weapons of victory while being disenfranchised prisoners, zeks, whose names were erased from history, replaced by camp numbers. Tupolev, Korolev, Petliakov, the list of shadows was long. Petrov knew he was next. If the barrel couldn't withstand the pressure, if the recoil destroyed the turret, if the shell didn't penetrate the armor, he had no right to an engineering error. An error was equated to treason against the motherland. It was this fear, this sticky horror before the omnipotent machine of repression, that forced the brain to work in afterburner mode. People didn't sleep for days, not just out of patriotism. They worked so as not to disappear into the basements of the Lubyanka. When the designers made the decision to put a howitzer caliber in a tank, it was an act of desperation. But it was also an act of civic courage. It's an adventure, they told him. It contradicts the norms. To hell with the norms, Petrov answered, looking with inflamed eyes at the breech drawing. If we don't do this, they'll shoot us, and they'll be right to do so, because otherwise the Germans will come here. Now, in May 45, when tanks are driving along Unter den Linden, no one remembers the sleepless nights in Sverdlovsk. No one sees the gray hair of 30-year-old engineers.
Glory goes to the armor and the crews. The creators remain in the shadows. Iron turned out to be stronger than people. The IS-2 tank withstood hits that cracked the earth. It passed where the engines of other machines stalled. It lived. But people broke. Heart attacks at 40 became an occupational disease of chief designers. The nervous system burned out faster than the barrel life under intense firing. Petrov lights a Kazbek cigarette. His hands are shaking, not from old age, from the experience tension, which hasn't gone anywhere. The system does not forgive weakness. Winners are not judged, people say. But in reality, the winning designers continue to be kept on a short leash. Comrade Chief Designer, the secretary enters the office. Call from Moscow. They demand a report on new prospective developments. Deadlines are tight. Petrov stubs out the cigarette in the overflowing ashtray. The war ended an hour ago, but the arms race never ends. He looks at the poster on the wall. Everything for the front, everything for victory. Now this slogan will be replaced by another, but the essence will remain the same. Produce results or die. The fate of a weapon creator is tragic. He gives people a sword to protect their lives, but his own life does not belong to him. He is a hostage of his talent and a hostage of the state. The IS-2 became a symbol of the power of the Soviet Union. Its silhouette against the background of the Brandenburg Gate is an icon of the 20th century. But behind this icon stands not only the heroism of tankers. Behind it stands the quiet feat of men in worn jackets who solved impossible ballistic equations under the sword of Damocles of a firing squad article. Paradox of war. To create a machine capable of crushing fascism, one had to go through one's own internal hell. Clench the will into a fist, forget about fear, forget about oneself. Petrov picks up the phone receiver. Listening? Yes, the blueprints are ready. Yes, 130 millimeters. Yes, I understand the responsibility. He puts down the receiver. The work continues. A tank is dead matter, a pile of alloy steel, rubber, and gunpowder. People breathe life into it, those who burn in it on the front line, and those who burn out behind the drafting board in the rear. The irony is that this monstrous mechanism of destruction, this hammer of war, was created by people who wanted silence more than anything else in the world. But to get silence, they had to create the loudest voice of the era. Iron is stronger than people. The armor steel of the IS-2 will last for centuries, becoming a monument on a pedestal. People will go. Engineers will go. Tankers will go. But their creation will remain. A rough, powerful, inevitable proof that human will is capable of subjugating physics, even when life itself hangs by a thread. The price of triumph is never written in history textbooks. It remains in the scars on the heart of the designer who looks at the victory salute with dry, tired eyes and thinks not of glory, but that the mechanism worked. And that today, they won't come for him. Berlin, May 2nd, 1945. The square in front of the Brandenburg Gate. Silence hangs here. This is not the silence found in a forest or a library. It is a ringing, oppressive emptiness that has set in after 4 years of continuous thunder. The engine of a heavy IS-2 tank stalls. The 12-cylinder V2 diesel, which roared from the Volga to the Spree, makes the last turn of the crankshaft and freezes. Only the 46-ton behemoth cooling down is audible. Metal clicks, contracting. Armor, red hot from battle, gives off heat into the cold spring air. The commander climbs out of the hatch. He doesn't shout, "Hurrah!" He doesn't throw his headset into the sky. He just sits on the edge of the turret, legs dangling, and lights a cigarette. His face is gray from ingrained brick dust. His hands are black with oil.
He looks at the ruins of the city that just yesterday was the center of evil, and today has become a pile of construction debris. In this moment lies the main paradox of the weapon. Before us is a perfect mechanism of murder. The IS-2 was not created for parades. It was created to break, burn, punch through, and destroy. Its D-25T gun is an instrument of violence in pure form. 25 kilograms of explosives and steel flying at a speed of 800 meters per second carry nothing but death. But it was this mechanism that became the highest manifestation of humanism in this war. Look at the infantry walking past the tank. Tired, dirty soldiers in faded field shirts. They stroke the side of the IS as if it were not cold steel, but the flank of a living horse. Why? Because every high-explosive shell fired by this tank at a machine gun nest in a basement saved the life of a whole platoon. Because every breached wall through which the tank cleared a path spared the infantry from having to storm a street under fire. Because every burned tiger that didn't have time to shoot is hundreds of funeral letters that won't arrive in Russian villages. The IS-2 became a shield, the active armor of the nation. It took on the work that used to be done by bodies. In 41, pillboxes were covered with chests. In 45, pillboxes were demolished by caliber 122 millimeters. This is technical humanism. Iron should die instead of men. The machine fulfilled its function. It was born in the agony of retreat, designed in the cold sweat of fear before the German menagerie, built by hungry people in the unheated workshops of the Urals. It evolved from a clumsy experiment to the dominant predator of the planet. Remember the summer of 43, powerlessness, ricochets, burning T-34s, and now look at May 45. German equipment lies on the roadsides, torn to shreds. The walls of the Reichstag are covered in chalk writing, and in the middle of all this stands the argument that is impossible to dispute. Crews raise their gun barrels up. This is not a salute. This is a gesture of fixing the result. Barrels looking into the sky form a steel forest, long, powerful tubes with muzzle brakes. They are no longer needed. Within a radius of 1,000 kilometers, there is no target capable of withstanding their blow. The gunner wipes his hands with a rag. His work is finished. He no longer needs to catch milliseconds between heartbeats to pull the trigger. He no longer needs to fear that the German will load faster. The race of calibers is over. We won not because we had more tanks. We won because we created the absolute weapon at the moment when it was a question of the survival of the biological species. The tank cools. It smells of diesel, powder fumes, and plaster. This smell is the smell of peace. Peace is not brought on a silver platter by diplomats in white gloves. Peace is established when the weapon is knocked out of the aggressor's hands, along with the hands. The IS-2 did exactly that. It physically dismantled the Wehrmacht war machine, taking it apart for spare parts using kinetic energy. Standing at the Brandenburg Gate, Soviet tankers understood a simple, cruel truth. Weakness provokes violence. Strength guarantees silence. 2 years ago, when designers Kotin and Petrov drew the first sketches of installing the A-19 gun in the turret, it seemed impossible. When factory workers turned parts for 18 hours a day, it seemed impossible. When crews learned to shoot with separate loading in 20 seconds, it seemed impossible. But they did it. They created a monster to kill a monster. And when the monster breathed its last, the monster froze, turning into a monument to human will. The war is over. Balance is restored. History will remember this tank not as a beautiful machine. There is no elegance in it. It is rude, cramped, and heavy. History will remember it as the hammer that drove the last nail into the coffin of fascism. The barrel is lowered, the hatch is closed. Silence. And in this silence, only one thing is audible. How 122 millimeters changed this world forever. Because now everyone knows we have an answer. And this answer weighs 46 tons.